Default text, the autopsy of history, is rarely clean, but the medical records from July 15, 18 contain an anomaly that defies biological logic. Imagine a human body pushing past the absolute limit of endurance. The shins are filled with stress fractures. The feet are raw meat, the skin ground away by cobblestones, leaving a trail of bloody paste in the dirt. The heart is beating so fast, it is fluttering like a trapped bird, moments away from bursting. The victim is dying of acute exhaustion. They are in agony. But if you look at their face, they are smiling, a wide, rigid, unblinking grin, and they are still dancing. This isn't a dark fairy tale. This is a forensic fact. This is the moment when 400 people became prisoners in their own bodies. Welcome to Frequency Unsolved. We are in Strasbourg, part of the Holy Roman Empire. It is the summer of 1518, and the city is already dying. You need to understand the atmosphere before you can understand the madness. If you were walking the streets that July, the air would have tasted like ash and rot. The region had been decimated. A succession of brutal winters, hailstorms that flattened the wheat, and blazing droughts had left the granaries empty. People were hollowed out. They were walking skeletons haunted by the specter of the Black Death, which still lingered in living memory, and terrified of a God who seemed to be actively punishing them. The church told them their hunger was a sin. The government told them there was no food. The heat was a physical weight, a wet wool blanket pressing down on the open sewers and the unwashed masses. The city was silent. It was the silence of people who were too weak to scream. And then a door opened. It began with a woman named Frau Trophia. She stepped out of her timber-framed house into a narrow, shadowed alleyway. She didn't look at her neighbors. She didn't speak to her husband. She walked to the center of the street, and she twitched. It wasn't a graceful movement. It was a spasm, a sharp, violent jerk of the shoulder, then a kick, then a spin. There was no music. That is the detail that makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. There were no instruments, just the heavy, humid silence of the city, punctuated by the rhythmic clack-clack of her shoes on the stone. She began to dance. Her husband begged her to stop. She didn't hear him. She was locked inside her own skull. She danced through the afternoon. She danced as the sun went down. She danced until her face turned purple and her sweat soaked through her heavy linen dress. She collapsed from exhaustion in the dark, twitching in the dirt. They thought it was a seizure. They dragged her inside, gave her water. But the next morning, the moment the sun hit the street, she was back. Her feet must have been screaming in pain. Her muscles must have been locked in cramps. But she stood up, and she began to spin again. If it had stopped with Frau Trophia, we would call it a singular psychotic break. But the human mind is contagious. By the end of the week, 34 people were dancing with her. This is where the story shifts from oddity to horror. This wasn't a festival. It was a contagion. The people joining her were mostly the poor, the starving, the desperate. They didn't look at each other. They didn't hold hands. They were isolated units of misery, united only by a rhythm that no one else could hear. Imagine the smell of that street. 34 unwashed bodies sweating in the July heat, dancing in their own filth. The stones became slick with blood. Their shoes disintegrated. They were dancing on open wounds, peeling the skin back from the bone, yet they did not stop. They could not stop. The Privy Council of Strasbourg, the city's ruling body, watched this unfold with the cold, detached logic of bureaucrats. They were men of commerce and stone. They understood taxes. They understood walls. They did not understand why their citizens were pirouetting into the grave. They consulted the local physicians, and here we witness a medical catastrophe born of arrogance. The doctors looked at the dancers. They saw the flushed skin, the manic movement, the feverish eyes. They consulted their charts of the four humors. Their diagnosis? Hot blood. They concluded that the victims' brains were overheated. The blood was boiling in their veins. The logic followed a twisted medieval path. If the blood is hot, it must be cooled. If the victims are dancing, it is because the body is trying to expel this excess energy. Therefore, the cure is not to stop them. The cure is to help them finish. They must dance it out, the doctor said. Let them free themselves of the madness. It was a death sentence. The council decided to scale up the operation. They cleared the grain market, the horse market, and turned it into a stage. They opened the guild halls, but they reasoned that the dancers were disorganized. If they were to cure themselves, they needed rhythm. They needed a beat to synchronize the expulsion of the disease. So the city hired musicians. This is the part that feels like a nightmare logic. The government paid for professional pipers and drummers to come into the square. They set up stands. They began to play loud, driving, relentless beats. They were trying to organize the chaos. Instead, they poured gasoline on a fire. Sound carries in the stone canyons of a medieval city. The drumbeat echoed off the cathedral walls. It vibrated through the timber of the houses. People who were hiding in their homes, people who were terrified, heard the drums. The rhythm tapped into that dark, broken part of their starving brains. They came out. Shopkeepers left their stalls. Mothers put down their infants. The elderly rose from their deathbeds. They walked toward the market square, drawn like moths to a bug zapper. And once they stepped onto that dance floor, they never left. The numbers swelled. 100, 200, 400. Now we are in the realm of hell. The market square became a mosh pit of the damned. It was a churning sea of limbs and sweat. The noise was deafening, the relentless pounding of the drums, the shrill piping of the flutes, and the utter lack of human speech. No one was singing, no one was shouting. There were only the sounds of physical destruction, the grunt of breath, the slap of wet flesh against flesh, the audible snap of tendons, because they were literally dancing themselves to death. Historical chronicles from the time describe the scene with a trembling hand. They report that as the dancers reached the point of total organ failure, their faces contorted. You would expect to see agony. You would expect to see weeping. But the chroniclers report the rhesus sardonicus, the rictus grin. It is a reflexive spasm of the facial muscles caused by electrolyte depletion and toxic shock. As their hearts burst, as their kidneys shut down from rhabdomyolysis, the poisoning of the blood by dissolved muscle tissue, their faces pulled back into wide, terrifying smiles. They looked ecstatic, but their eyes were dead. They were passengers in a vehicle that was careening off a cliff, and the steering wheel had come off in their hands. People began to drop, but the crowd was so dense they couldn't fall. They were held up by the press of the bodies, corpses dancing between the living, bobbing and weaving in the macabre tide. When they finally hit the ground, the rhythm didn't stop. The boots of the living stomped on the faces of the dead. The blood mixed with the dust and the sweat, creating a slick black mud that coated everyone. And still, the band played on. The council had paid them to cure the city, and they were terrified to stop. They played louder, faster, trying to exorcise the demon, but they were only feeding it. This went on for weeks. Eventually, the city council realized their catastrophic error. The theory of hot blood was a fallacy. This wasn't a cure. It was a massacre. They pivoted from medicine to theology. If the doctors couldn't save them, perhaps the priests could. They ordered the music to stop. They banned dance in the city. They ordered the afflicted to be bundled into wagons and carted off to the shrine of St. Vitus, a chapel in the craggy hills near Saverne. St. Vitus, the patron saint of dancers and epileptics. The belief of the peasantry was that St. Vitus had cursed them. They called it the choreomania. They believed that if you provoked the saint by swearing, by gluttony, or by lack of faith, he would seize your limbs. At the shrine, the priests performed an exorcism of sorts. They forced the survivors' bloody, broken feet into red leather shoes, a ritual offering. They marched them around the wooden altar, supporting their weight as they stumbled. They performed Mass. And slowly, gradually, the dancing stopped. The survivors collapsed. They slept for days. When they woke up, they had no memory of the joy. They only remembered the fear. They remembered the inability to stop. They remembered the feeling of being puppets on invisible strings, jerked around by a cruel master. The plague of 1518 faded as the summer cooled. The dead were buried in mass graves. The city tried to forget, but it left a scar on the psyche of Europe, and it leaves a question that hangs in the air, even 500 years later. What actually happened to them? We love to categorize things. We want a rational explanation. We want to say, oh, it was poison, or it was a cult. We want a cause and effect that fits into a neat box so we can sleep at night without checking the locks. But Frequency Unsolved doesn't do neat boxes. Let's look at the theories and watch them crumble. For decades, the leading theory was ergotism. Ergot is a mold that grows on damp rye. It contains lysergic acid, the raw material for LSD. In the Middle Ages, when the harvest was wet, people would bake the mold into their bread. The result was known as St. Anthony's fire. It caused hallucinations, burning sensations, and convulsions. It seems to fit, doesn't it? They were starving. They were eating rotting bread. Maybe they were all just tripping on medieval acid. But there's a biological problem. Ergotism is a vasoconstrictor. It restricts blood flow to the extremities. It causes gangrene. Your fingers and toes turn black and fall off. It makes movement agonizingly difficult. A person suffering from ergot poisoning can barely walk to the bathroom, let alone perform a high-energy cardio endurance test for 6 days straight. Ergot kills you, but it doesn't make you dance, so toss the bread out. What about a heretical cult? Was this a secret sect performing a ritual? Unlikely. The accounts are clear. These people were not willing participants. They were screaming for help. They were begging for mercy. Frau Trophia wasn't a high priestess. She was a frightened woman in dirty laundry. There was no leader, no chant, no goal. That leaves us with the most terrifying explanation of all, the one that modern psychology accepts but can't fully explain. Mass Psychogenic Illness. We used to call it mass hysteria. It is the concept that a thought, a pure, non-physical idea can become a pathogen. Consider the environment again. Strasbourg in 1518 was a pressure cooker of trauma, famine, disease, spiritual terror. The people were living in a state of chronic, unendurable stress. Their cortisol levels would have been off the charts. They truly believed that demons and saints could possess their bodies at any moment. When the human mind reaches a breaking point, when the reality is too painful to process, it dissociates. It looks for an escape hatch. Frau Trophia's mind broke first. She entered a trance state, a dissociation. She began to dance because in her broken mind, St. Vitus was making her do it. It absolved her of responsibility. And then, the mirror neurons of her neighbors kicked in. We are social animals. We are hardwired to mimic. When we see someone yawn, we yawn. When we see someone panic, we panic. In Strasbourg, the virus was the site of the dance itself. The belief in the curse of St. Vitus was so strong, the fear so deep, that when they saw her dancing, their brains accepted a new reality. We are cursed. We must dance. Their subconscious minds seized control of their motor functions. It is a conversion disorder on a grand scale. The psychological anguish was converted into physical kinetics. Think about what that implies. It means there was no bacteria. There was no virus in the water. There was no poison in the bread. The monster was their own belief system. They danced because they believed they had to. They died because their minds told their bodies that stopping was impossible. The software of the human brain corrupted the hardware of the human body. And the musicians, the drums, they just provided the clock cycle for the glitch. They synchronized the psychosis, turning a few isolated breakdowns into a mechanized factory of death. It suggests that the barrier between your mind and your body is much thinner than you think. You believe you are in control. You believe that if you tell your hand to stop moving, it will stop. but 400 people in Strasbourg prove that the connection can be severed by nothing more than fear. As we wrap up this file, I want you to do something. Look down at your own hands, wiggle your fingers, tap your foot on the floor. You feel like you are the captain of this vessel, don't you? You tell the muscle to contract, and it contracts. You trust that connection. But the dancers of 1518 thought they were captains too, until the day the engine started running on its own. We like to think we have evolved past this. We have science. We have MR-is. We don't believe in St. Vitus anymore. But we still have stress. We still have fear. We still have the crushing weight of a world that sometimes feels like it's ending. We see mass psychogenic illness today, school children who all suddenly develop tics, embassy staff who fall ill from sounds that aren't there, factories where workers faint in waves with no chemical cause. The hardware hasn't changed. The software is still buggy. So the next time you find yourself tapping your foot to a song you can't quite hear, or the next time you feel a twitch in your eye that won't go away, just remember Frau Trophia. Remember the heat. Remember the bloody feet on the cobblestones. And pray that when you tell your body to stop, it listens. But this is just one story from the shadows. If you want to dive deeper into the unexplained, I have another file waiting for you on the screen right now. It digs into a mystery that is even more disturbing than the one you just heard. Click it now and let's continue the investigation. Until then, check your locks and keep the lights on.